Calling this info briefing to order. Aloha mai kako. I am Mike Gabbard, Chair of the Senate Agriculture Environment Committee, and I hope you and your ohana are well and keeping safe. A couple of brief announcements before we begin the presentations. Because the building is still currently closed to the public, this info briefing will be streamed live online on the Senate YouTube channel that's available via the hearing notice. And for all of you presenters participating remotely, please keep your mic on mute when you're not actively speaking. Please don't unmute your mic or speak until you're called on. And also check your chat panel periodically. So today's joint informational briefing is being co-chaired by the Senate AEN committee and Waterland committees and the House Energy and Environmental Protection, Agriculture and Water and Land committees. The briefing will provide an update on the state's efforts to address threats posed by invasive species, as well as the state's interagency biosecurity plan in place to minimize these threats. So first, I'd like to introduce the AEN members who are here on Zoom, myself, and let me see who else is here. So Senator Rhodes is here, and I'm hopeful that Senator Ocasio and Senator Favela, and who am I not thinking about right here? Oh, Vice Chair, Senator Nishar will be joining us later. And I'll turn it over the mic now to the other co-chairs to introduce their members, starting with Waterland Chair, Senator Inouye.
Thank you, Chair Gabbard. I'm not sure who's here. I can't see them, all of them on view, but I did hear you say that Senator Favela is on your committee as well. He is on mine, so I assume he's on there. I'm not sure if Senator, my Vice Chair, Senator Agaran, will be on, but he normally gets on, so we'll play by ear as of now. Having said that, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Next, Rep. Lowen.
Aloha, I'm Nicole Lowen, Chair of the House Committee on Energy and Environmental Protection. I don't see, I mean, Chair Hashem is also, we're also on each other's committees, but other than that, a lot of our members are currently in finance or CPC hearings that are concurrent to this. So maybe some of them will join us later if they're able, but we'll be sure to share all this important information with them.
Thank you, Rep. Lowen. Rep. Hashem.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Mark Hashem. I also see Representative Bronco on there, and I think that's the only other member that we probably missed. And I'll turn it back to you.
All right, Rep. Tarnas.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Water and Land Committee in the House, I'm grateful that everyone is here. Other members are at other hearings right now, and so I'll be carrying this information and provide it to them. And I appreciate everyone being here. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Rep. Tarnas. Okay, so a few opening remarks. I think it's interesting that invasive species are one of the few issues that multiple state agencies work together to address. You know, many times I've noticed departments, they get stuck in their silos and they aren't really aware of what other agencies are doing. But the reality is invasive species impact agriculture, human health, transportation, natural and cultural resources, tourism, basically our way of life here in the islands. So this info briefing will showcase the continuing efforts of our state agencies and partners to implement the goals and actions outlined in the Hawaii Interagency Biosecurity Plan. This year actually marks the halfway point since the plan's launch in 2017. So today we will be hearing from the dedicated staff who are working to implement the 147 action items. That's right, 147 action items in the biosecurity plan and their department's role in improving biosecurity for Hawaii. So first off, we have Chelsea Arnott with the Hawaii Invasive Species Council to provide us with an update on the Hawaii Interagency Biosecurity Plan. Chelsea?
Great, thank you so much, Chair Gabbard. And aloha, chairs, vice chairs, and members of all the committees. Thank you for that introduction. It was great. I'm going to share my screen right now. So just give me a second to get that going. And just for logistics, I'll be sharing my screen for all the presenters today, just to make it a little easier for the transitions as we go forward. So I just really want to thank you all for participating in this informational briefing. I know the schedules are incredibly busy, so I really appreciate you all taking the time out to hear about what our agencies, our partners are doing, working together with invasive species. And that was such a great introduction, because I agree, this informational briefing is really unique compared to other informational briefings, because we have multiple departments represented here today, as well as some of our partners that are working on the prevention and management of invasive species. And invasive species, I mean, they have no jurisdictions, they have no boundaries, they impact every sector. And that's really why the Hawaii Invasive Species Council, which I'm a planner for, was established back in 2003. The purpose of the council is to provide policy level direction, coordination, and planning amongst the state departments for the prevention, control, and eradication of harmful invasive species. Probably most of you are familiar with the council, but I just want to run through who we are and put some faces to the actions that we're doing here. So our council members include that are voting representatives from the Departments of Transportation, Business and Economic Development and Tourism, Health, the University of Hawaii, and the Departments of Agriculture and Land and Natural Resources. Both serve as co-chairs to the council. We also have our non-voting legislative members that you see, and there's a few folks in the room today. And then we have our HST program support staff. And so these staff oversee some of our programs, like the Ports of Entry Biosecurity program that was formerly known as Mamalo Poi Poi, the 643pest.org, our pest reporting hotline, the Hawaii Pacific Weed Risk Assessment. And since we're multi-agency, we also oversee the tracking and implementation of the Hawaii Interagency Biosecurity Plan that Chair Gabbard mentioned earlier. Again, because of the multi-agency nature of the council, we really help to kind of coordinate the efforts of, how are we doing with implementing this plan? But what you're going to hear from today are the folks that are actually doing the implementation of what Chair Gabbard said, those 147 action items. So these folks are really the ones that are putting in the work to make a more biosecure Hawaii. And just a few other things that we do. We also are responsible for the dispersal of state funding that supports projects and programs across Hawaii that are critical to managing invasive species. You can see some photos here of the Island Invasive Species Committee. They do really critical work at controlling incipient invasive species like little fire ants on Maui, eradicating albizia trees on Molokai, and also supporting other research, prevention, and control and outreach projects. But the need continues to grow, and our current funding only supports a portion of these projects and programs that are so critical to biosecurity in Hawaii. And this graph just shows we've had a steady increase in the green bars for our state appropriation, but you can see the need of our programs and projects just continue to grow. And that brings us over to the Hawaii Interagency Biosecurity Plan. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm only going to just provide a real brief update on the biosecurity plan, but then I'm going to turn it over to our partners to talk a little bit more about what they're doing. And so the Biosecurity Plan was launched by Department of Agriculture in 2017. It outlines a 10-year shared path forward to improving biosecurity in Hawaii. As mentioned before, there's 147 action items identified in the plan that are key to addressing gaps at the areas of the pre-border, border, and post-border. Since its launch, we've begun implementation on 65% of the actions But when you break that down, only a small portion of those have been or can be considered completed so far. A lot of those are ongoing in perpetuity. They don't really have any end. And there's still a lot of progress and a lot of work to be done. We've made really great strides, but there's still a lot to be done. And I just want you to keep in mind that invasive species, once they're established, they have high cost and damages and management. These are just probably a few familiar faces: brown tree snake, little fire ants, Myconia, and then newer introductions, Rapidohea death and coconut rhinoceros beetle that we don't really know the cost of yet. And then just the comparison of those with 1 year of implementation of the biosecurity plan compared to the cost of any of these species becoming established. And I will leave it at that and pass it over to our partners at Hawaii Department of Agriculture. We have Helmut Rogg and Raquel Wong. I will just pull up their presentation here.
All right. Well, thank you, chairs, vice chairs, and members of the committees. Thank you for the opportunity to present the accomplishments of our department. As partner in the biosecurity program, we have 2 divisions involved in protecting Hawaii from invasive species. I'm Helmut Rogg, administrator of the Plant Industry Division with the department that consists of the Plant Quarantine Branch, the Plant Pest Control Branch, and the Pesticides Branch. The second division is our Animal Industry Division, and Dr. Wong will report out following my presentation. Next slide, please. The mission of our division is to protect Hawaii's unique natural resources and agriculture economy from invasive species. How do we accomplish this mission? Next slide, please. Our 3-prong approach is focusing on prevention. Preventing the invasive pests from coming to Hawaii in the first place is more economical than waiting until it is established. Being proactive is the preferred approach over reactive mode. Part of our preventive measures include enforcing quarantine regulations based on pest risk assessments. However, since not everyone stops at the stop sign, we use our second line of defense, our detection system, to early detect invasive species so we can rapidly respond and eradicate the incipient population before it becomes established and spread to other sites and islands. If we are, despite of all our proactive approaches, not successful in keeping an invasive species out, we implement management programs, including our biological control. Next slide, please. What are some of our accomplishments? As part of our prevention approach, we implemented an interim rule for the coffee leaf rust disease, and we are currently finalizing an interim rule to slow the spread of the coconut rhinoceros beetle on Oahu. We are also working on a quarantine rule to regulate the importation of firewood to Hawaii, minimizing the risk of accidentally importing exotic wood-boring pests. Last year, our Plant Quarantine Branch launched a new database to assist in our inspection efforts. Kupono is the new database that facilitates the work of our inspectors and is also more user-friendly for our customers than the old system. However, despite all of our efforts, we continue detecting new exotic species. On average, every year we have reported 20 new species, from new state to new US records. There are indications that some of these new species are using a new pathway that I will mention later on. Our detection approach is to collaboratively implement a detection survey program for important invasives with our state and federal partners. For several established invasive pests, we continue our management projects. We have added additional funding to the coffee berry borer and the coffee leaf rust subsidy program to offset the additional costs to protect coffee from coffee berry borer and now coffee leaf rust. We also closely working with our coffee industry, researchers from UH, ARS, and HARC and our regulatory sister agency, APHIS PPQ, to find a safe and efficient way to import clean, resistant coffee varieties from overseas through a clean plant network approach to Hawaii. We're also working with our industry and stakeholders to reduce the spread of the coconut rhinoceros beetle, as you just heard, using compliance agreements, mitigating the risk of spread through green waste. We're about to execute an additional contract with UH researchers on the management of the two-line spittlebug and offer a subsidy program to assist with the additional cost of fighting this new pasture pest. Next slide, please. As part of the biosecurity plan, our agency is fulfilling its statutory role in protecting Hawaii from invasive species. We are in the process of refilling some of the vacancies in our branches, hiring for positions identified in the biosecurity plan, and identifying new personnel needs based on funding reality. For our pre-border activities, we are focusing on generating risk analysis assessments, how invasives get here, which ones, and on what pathway. Our plant quarantine branch successfully switched to a new database system that assists in prioritizing our inspection efforts and obtaining important cargo data for improving our inspection success. Next slide, please. Upon arrival of cargo and passengers, our qualified PQ inspectors inspect risk material at our airports and maritime ports. In addition, we deploy specific traps for known invaders in coordination and collaborations with our partners to implement our EDRR approach, early detection, rapid response. We want to prevent invasive species from entering our state before they become established. As mentioned, it is more economical to prevent invasive species from entering Hawaii than reacting to them once they are established. Next slide, please. However, some pests may evade our control because we don't have specific lures or traps to early detect them, and they do become established. Our specialists from plant quarantine and plant pest control branches try to implement eradication efforts for incipient populations, which we may be still able to eradicate, such as the coqui frog and the little fire ant populations on some islands. Once the pest is well established or we don't have good eradication tools available, we develop management options in coordination with our partners. A successful long-term management option is biological control. And Hawaii is one of the top leaders in biocontrol programs in the country. Next slide, please. Our challenges obviously are multiple. We are constantly reviewing critical positions based on today's needs and funding limitations. We are working on funding support of adequate facilities, in particular for our biocontrol facility, and we are dealing with new pathways of invasive pests. Today, you can purchase anything from anywhere online and get it shipped to your home overnight. And in addition, because of the COVID pandemic, we are experiencing funding limitations for adequate pest response, which I will show you in the next slides. However, these challenges offer us an opportunity to continuously review our pest response and eradication approach. Next slide, please. So coqui is one of these examples. We've been responding to various coqui populations on Oahu for over 10 years. We are able to hold our grounds, but it comes with a steep cost. And my division does not have a line item to adequately deal with the coqui invasion, so we have to find alternative approaches. Currently, we are bringing together all of our partners with invasive species experience to work on an adequate response to the coqui population here in Waimanalo. Next slide, please. The other example of long-term project is our response to the little fire ant. Over the last 10 years or so, we have spent a significant amount of resources on our LFA response, but have difficulties making a dent in the eradication. Our department experts and others, including obviously our Hawaii and lab, continue their efforts to slow the spread but we are faced with financial limitations. However, we still believe that working with our experts and adequate funding, we can continue holding the spread. Last slide, please. In summary, it takes all of us to protect Hawaii. Thank you. And in continuation, Dr. Wong will briefly present our animal industry's role in the biosecurity program. Dr. Wong.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity for allowing us to share briefly about what animal industry does and how we are fulfilling our mission. All right. Chelsea, I am not able to see my screen. Sorry. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. So the first slide I wanted to present was how our division features in with the plant industry division. And as you can see here, we do many things that complement the plant industry division. And we work with them because the plant quarantine branch, particularly, they are the gatekeepers with their established list of prohibited and restricted species. And what animal industry does is sets the criteria or the conditions for the animal commodities that are moving across our borders. The challenge is trying to do that at the speed of commerce. Next slide, please. All right. So our mission is to safeguard against animal diseases and pests that could impact human health as well as commerce. And we do that under the concept of One Health, which is a recognized concept among our public health partners because it examines the interaction between human health, animal health, and the environment. Next slide, please. So Animal Industry Division has a long history of performing biosecurity tasks to support that mission. Routinely, animals that are coming into our state are required to be identified in a unique manner. They are tested for particular diseases that we are concerned about. And then we are also identifying who the owners are and where their destination is. At the border, we are reviewing those documents, verifying their identity, as well as ensuring that they're not showing any signs of clinical disease. And actually, that doesn't end our response. So after they arrive, some species are required to be isolated from the resident animals that might be on the farm. In addition, they might also be subject to post-arrival testing, which continues to ensure that they do not carry any diseases that have a longer incubation period. We also increase the awareness continuously with our veterinary partners in practice by engaging them and doing outreach to make sure that they recognize signs of disease and will alert our office. And that in conjunction with our federal partners, USDA, APHIS, to recognize diseases that might impact commerce as well as public health. Next slide, please. So emerging threats, disease threats, and diseases that are foreign to the United States are something that we have great concern about. Many times the avian influenza virus can severely affect poultry, and that is something that they are exposed to when migratory birds, which are asymptomatic for the virus, may come into contact with these poultry, and that can be very devastating for poultry operations. In recent years, African swine fever, which is a fatal disease in swine species only, has risen in Asia. And given Hawaii's close relationship with Asia, both culturally as well as in proximity, there is concern that this virus may make its way into the US. The virus itself is actually very efficient. It can move not just on sick animals, it can also move on meat products as well as feedstuff. So along with our federal partners, we make sure to watch for any signs and investigate occurrences of disease. And finally, exotic ticks, that's the other one that we worry about. Hawaii is blessed to only have two types of tick species, the brown dog tick and the spinous ear tick. And with ticks on the US mainland, they are moving westward and northward. And so they bring diseases with them. The most probably visible one is the Lyme disease in the deer tick. And by making sure that we're checking the dogs and horses, which are species known to carry ticks, we want to ensure that we keep the tick population here as it is. Okay, now we're on the next slide. So, of course, along with the biosecurity plan, we are looking to get better at our job. And with that, as far as the interagency biosecurity plan, we're hoping to gate safe, secure facilities so we can continue to do our work, as well as continuing to develop a workforce of skilled personnel that can recognize diseases or detect diseases, and of course, access to resources when response is necessary and corrective action is necessary. Final slide. Whoop, that was it. And there's the final slide. So again, thank you so much, committee members, for taking this opportunity to listen to the information I've had to share. And myself, as well as our division administrator, Dr. Isaac Mayera, who's also with us today, will be available for questions.
Yeah, mahalo. We are gonna move over to Department of Land and Natural Resources. We have Emma Ewan and Kim Fuller. Let me get this set up.
Aloha, everyone. Emma Ewan with Division of Forestry and Wildlife. I'm going to just jump in really quickly because I think a lot of you are familiar with our 2030 goal to protect 30% of our watershed forests by 2030, which is mainly to keep invasive hoofed animals like pigs, sheep, deer, and goats out of our forests. Next slide. We're asking for another $4 million in watershed CIP funding this year. That would be in addition to the existing $4 million appropriated for fiscal year 23. And you might wonder, where is that going? We're really going to be focusing on two main priorities. Next slide. The first one is Maui and Molokai, really trying to keep these exploding populations of axis deer from really infiltrating these mountain areas and basically building these circular fences around the tops of the mountains where the forest remains to protect them from this really damaging pest. Next slide. And then the other real big focus of this additional funding would be for Hawaii Island. The rapid ohia death crisis that has killed over 1 million trees is shown to be really able to be mitigated through removing hoofed animals. And you can see this is a picture of an area in Kahuku on the south side of Hawaii Island, where that strip in the right-hand side is unfenced. You can see so much more mortality trees than the areas in the left side that are fenced and protected from hoofed animals. So it's just night and day. This is a really incredible tool to keep trees from being wounded and have that infection site. Next slide. We've seen between 2 to 69 times higher infection rates in areas that are unfenced versus right next door where they've been protected. So this is just an amazing solution that's at our fingertips to protect these forests from rapid ohia death. Next slide. You can just see right now, only 6% of Hawaii Island is actually ungulate free and fenced. And so we're really trying to increase that percentage. We want to quickly get rid of the hoofed animals within recently constructed fenced areas. And that's actually something, next slide, that we're going to be helping, we'd be doing with HB 1769, which is a bill to appropriate additional funding for that hoofed animal removal, as well as other really important things, monitoring, surveys, that sort of thing for rapid ohia death response. Next slide. And just to remind you that, the funding that's provided for CIP has been really magnified because it enables us to attract non-state funding. And we've been able to get $49 million in non-state funding from this watershed appropriations in the past 10 years. Next slide. And that's really helping our crews out there on all the islands being, in the mud, camping, working really hard in these very difficult conditions, being able to give back to the land that they really love and want to protect. So we're really hoping to keep this great work going. Next slide. Just really jumping into a bunch of other invasive species milestones we wanted to report. This past year, we're so excited to declare Lehua Island off Kauai rat-free. This has been decades in the making, and now there is a CIP request to put in a little bit of infrastructure to do the next phase of restoration. Next slide. Another amazing milestone was the first uau, the Hawaiian petrel nest discovered on Mauna Kea in about 70 years. Unfortunately, right as we discovered that, we also found a cat prowling around the burrow. So we really want to attract a safe place where this bird can have another population. And so that's another CIP request. Next slide. Still on Mauna Kea, we're about to finish the 90,000 acre fence that would entirely circle the mountain and protect the Palila critical habitat from goats and sheep. We need, and the final installment is being requested of CIP to support that, which is a court-ordered requirement to protect this critical habitat. And we're really hoping to be able to finish that. Another really interesting new technology we're working on is that Sterile Mosquito. I don't have enough time to talk about it here, but we're asking for a secondary renovation project on Oahu. Next slide. We're also trying to keep invasive predators from our snail populations. We have about 100 species of snails that are going to die in less than a decade, or sorry, go extinct in less than a decade because of these predators. And what we can do to save them is make these small predator-proof fences. So we're really trying to stop that as well by protecting these areas. And so there's an interactive map you can see of all of our DLNR CIP requests. And that's it. Aloha.
Aloha, thank you for giving me some time today. I'm with the Department of Land and Natural Resources Division of Aquatic Resources, Aquatic Invasive Species team. Next slide. So Hawaii's aquatic resources are extremely valuable to our island. It's estimated that $1.2 billion a year is generated from tourism associated with those aquatic environments, $13.3 million a year for nearshore fisheries. And also our reefs provide $835 million a year in protection, coastal protection of building values. Because we're so geographically isolated, we have a high rate of endemism and unique environments that are highly susceptible to invasive species. Next slide. So an aquatic invasive species is basically a non-native aquatic species that if introduced into an ecosystem, it cause harm to Hawaii's economy, environment, human health, or public safety and welfare. There's about 550 total introduced aquatic species that we know of in Hawaii, and that's likely an underestimate. Next. So the major vectors of aquatic invasive species include ballast water, biofouling, intentional or unintentional release, usually associated with aquarium or aquaculture hobbies, and marine debris. So ballast water and biofouling are just the water that ships use to keep proper balance, as well as the organisms that grow on the bottom of a ship. Next. So when we're thinking about prevention, we really want to prevent the major vectors bringing more invasive species. So we currently manage ballast water. We process about 800 ballast water reporting forms a year, and we also have a risk matrix to select ships to inspect. The Vessel Incidental Discharge Act is going to be enacted, and so the Division of Aquatic Resources has worked on achieving the mandates that the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act will have. So we've collaborated with CGAPs in meeting and providing comments to the EPA and the US Coast Guard during the development of new federal regulations under VITA. VITA, unfortunately, will preempt states from regulating ballast water and biofouling more stringently than VITA dictates. And it allows the states to enforce and co-enforce the new federal regulations. But it does prohibit the states from charging shipping companies a fee to support this regulatory work. So that avenue of revenue is excluded as VITA stands currently. Next. So since 2020, we have rapidly responded to 4 high-risk introductions. There was a heavily fouled dry dock that the company did clean, but we went to inspect it and did find invasive species on it. We removed them. We also removed corals found in Kaneohe Bay on Oahu and the North Shore of Hawaii that were likely illegally outplanted, and a corallimorph in the Alawai. Next. So we continued our invasive algae management as well this year. We've outplanted over 850,000 urchins, and we treat 235 acres in Kaneohe Bay and have expanded to treat 30 acres in the Waikiki MLCD. So the original management that occurred in Kaneohe Bay was mechanical removal, and then we outplant urchins that can graze the invasive algae to keep the reef healthy and allow it to grow. Next. So we have had some challenges. The revenue dictated by VITA is going to be a challenge coming up when we are looking to co-enforce. And we've also had 3 unfunded civil service positions for the past 2 years. So we've been running on a civil service team of 4 funded positions out of 7, so about 60% for the last 2 years. Next. So our priorities for 2022 are to work to enact new regulations under VITA, prioritize prevention and response to species of concern and pathways that are high risk, continue the invasive algae management with native urchin biocontrol, and expand the DAR AIS program capacity and reach. And so funding those positions would really help us with that. If you would like to contact me, here's my email. I've also listed the email of Elizabeth Monahan, who's the ballast water and biofouling coordinator. And we also have a general AIS email. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Kim and Emma. We'll next hear from Mike Melzer and Mark Wright with the University of Hawaii.
Hi. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to give this presentation. My name is Mike Melzer, along with my colleague Mark Wright, who's available for questions as well. We're with the College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources here at University of Hawaii at Manoa. Specifically, we're in the Department of Plant and Environmental Protection Sciences, which is the main focus of this department is invasive species work. Next slide, please. So yeah, invasive species, as we're aware, it continues to be a threat to our agriculture, economy, environment, and the well-being of ourselves. And this remains in a management and control of invasive species is a priority for CTAR through our mission, which includes both teaching, research, and extension. We also are involved on national networks as well. So it's not just CTAR as well. We exploit resources from, like I said, national networks such as the National Plant Diagnostic Network and the National Clean Plant Network that were mentioned earlier by Dr. Rogg at HDOA. And these help provide tools for us to combat invasive species in Hawaii, particularly those of agricultural focus. Next slide, please. From the administrative side of things, well, there's no secret there's been a net loss in research on this topic in CTAR, mostly due to retirement and other faculty who have left the college. However, invasive species research and education extension, it still remains an essential area for UH. So we're working on hiring requests within CTAR, and those are going to be guided by the strategic planning that the college is currently undergoing, and then based on what the economic reality is for both the college and the university in the coming years. Next slide. So we often break down invasive species by activities that happen before the border, before they get here. And some examples of those in recent years, we all remember, wow, it's been almost 20 years now since erythrina gallwasp showed up and basically decimated all our willy trees. And, it was some of this foreign exploration that found a successful biocontrol agent. Other activities that we're doing, a lot of tropical crops are understudied. We don't know the pests and diseases that impact them. So we've been traveling a lot, doing exploration in other countries to identify some of the pests and pathogens that threaten our crops. Here we're looking at probably the classic example of the Alamai babone disease of taro. These are taro plants from Papua New Guinea. And we don't even know what the pathogen that's responsible. We're working to identify those pathogens so we can develop diagnostics for their detection and exclusion from Hawaii. Next slide, please. We're also working at things that happen at the border. That's the next step, the next line of defense. A project we have going on that's funded by CGAPS, Coordinating Group on Alien Pest Species, through their proposal is we're working on diagnostics, basically utilizing new technologies and getting those to the front lines for our inspectors. We have great inspectors at the ports of entry. Some of these tools are really going to augment what they can do and expand the list of pests and pathogens that they can rapidly identify. Instead of having to submit samples, to a lab or so forth, they can do the work there. So we really need to take advantage of some of the new technologies that are emerging. Other activities include, developing and screening biocontrol agents under appropriate quarantine. Here's an example of the coffee berry borer parasitoid parasitizing a coffee berry borer adult. Next slide. And then we have a lot of, we're not a research organization, we're not a regulatory organization. So a lot of our activities is post-entry or post-border activities. An example of that again, Dr. Rogg alluded to are the surveys. So we, as the college, we do a lot of cooperative agricultural pest surveys or CAP surveys. And these are for exotic pests and pathogens that are both interest to USDA, the federal government, as well as here in Hawaii. And here's just an example of some of the crops that we are routinely looking for exotic pests and pathogens for in case we detect them. And if we detect them early, we can do a rapid response and hopefully lead to eradication. Next slide, please. We also have activities on two important pests. We've got Rami moth on mamaki and two-line spittlebugs. So we need basically basic research on some of these invasive species that are threatening. And then once we have that basic research, that's where we can develop new tools and strategies for eradication with the ultimate goal of long-term management. And that's the case if eradication is no longer an option. Next slide. Most of it always sounds bad, but there actually is some, it's hard to document some of the success stories with invasive species work, but a few that we could come up with. One that I find particularly valuable, just because I'm biased and I work with citrus, but we remain free of citrus greening, also known as huanglongbing. This is a disease that's impacting Florida severely. Basically, every citrus producing state in the US except us in Arizona have this disease. And Arizona will probably have it soon. This is really going to be basically boost Hawaii's prominence in terms of citrus industry and so forth in the US. For citrus is an important crop, and remaining free of this disease is critical to expand our citrus, the importance of citrus in Hawaii. We've heard a little bit about coconut rhinoceros beetle. This is a collaborative effort between HDOA, USDA, and here in CTAR. It's been a little over 8 years since it was first detected, and basically, the range has only minimally expanded since its introduction, where it's basically only gone a few miles from the original detection point, unlike in a lot of other places where it spread rapidly as soon as it is detected. We have completed quarantine work and are starting to apply for permits for a coffee berry borer biocontrol agent. There's some development of management tools for two-line spittlebug. This has so far been restricted to the Kona area, but it poses an important a major threat to pasture lands across the state, and also involved in the planning for a new quarantine research facility, which is desperately needed on Oahu and the Big Island. And I think that's actually our last slide. Next slide.
Yep, that's the last one. Thank you so much, Mike. Next, we'll hear from Christy Martin, who's with the Coordinating Group on Alien Pest Species, and also Lori Buchanan, who's with the Molokai Invasive Species Committee.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity and I appreciate all of the previous speakers. There's a lot of amazing work going on by very dedicated people. So I just wanted to take this time to share a little bit about, well, I guess our perspectives. Next slide. So you may be asking by now, well, who is CGAPS? You know, we heard about HST. Well, CGAPS is a partnership that includes not just the state agencies, but also the federal agencies that work on invasive species, as well as the non-governmental organizations. We're all working together to protect Hawaii. Many of the people that participate in CGAPS and the steering committee you've just heard from. We were formed in 1995 to try to identify and close the gaps in Hawaii's biosecurity programs. And I'm happy to say that CGAPS and HST networks bring different skills and abilities, different capacities to the table. And our strategy is a joint strategy, and it is focused on the highest priorities remaining in the Interagency Biosecurity Plan. We have the same vision too. It's to protect all of the things that we love and care about in Hawaii from the impacts of invasive species. Next slide. So where we see some strategic investments, you should have identified and seen some of the work that you folks funded. First of all, I mean, Dr. Rogg was on point. The e-manifest work is able to go forward because of their new Kupono database. It allows Department of Ag to work smarter and to prioritize and identify where there's risk. And so continued investment in that area is really important, as well as inspection facilities. We haven't talked much about that today, but that remains a priority. We would love to see more general funds go to Department of Agriculture for the inspection of domestic cargo and high-risk inter-island cargo. You heard two-line spittlebugs on one island, not the others. Coconut rhinoceros beetles on one island, not the others. We need to really start digging in and figuring out what we can do about those things. Providing general and CIP funds so that we all can fulfill our mission. For example, Department of Ag talked a bit about biocontrol. New biocontrol facilities will help us address some of those pests that have gotten past those defenses and still cause tremendous harm. And of course, we need to manage forests for the future, funding the fencing and restoration work that has to happen. That helps not just mitigate against the invasive itself, but it helps us in our plan to mitigate climate change impacts. Next slide. We need to support DAR in their work. The vectors of ballast water and biofouling are truly challenging, and currently we have 1.5 person to manage that pathway. It would also be great, and Rep. Lowen, you've spearheaded this work a bit in the past, but invasive species emergency response funds are important, and it's become actually a national priority. DOI is looking at how they might be able to work on something like this. Well, I think a state revolving fund might be in order as well. And obviously, there's a lot of groups outside of the agencies that work in everyone's communities, like the Invasive Species Committees, Hawaii Ant Lab, the Port Monitoring Surveillance Program called Mamalu Poi Poi, and all of these groups, including those at University of Hawaii. Many of them, including CGAPS, full disclaimer, we receive funds from HST. Not all of the funds come from HST, but some supporting funds do. And so additional funds, not just to HST, but also to the agencies that do the work is our message today. The HST really is a lot about gap filling. What Chelsea showed in the beginning, that graph about the amount that HST is receiving and how much requests they have, that's outside of the agency requests. It would be truly staggering if we put that graph together with what the agencies actually need. Next slide, please. And, oops, sorry, you can actually go to the previous slide. I left a space holder so that I can make sure and leave time for my colleague, Lori Buchanan, who comes to us from Molokai, and I just want to hand that over to her.
Aloha from Molokai, esteemed members. Mahalo, Christy Martin, for giving me a chance to see and talk to our legislators. I miss and love you guys. So with my 1 minute of opportunity, I wanted to say thank you. Committee chairs, Senator Gabbard, Senator Inouye, Representative Lowen, Representative Hashem, and Representative Tarnis, you're here. You're here listening, and on behalf of myself, my colleagues, and our people across our Paina, we want to convey our deep, sincere, and heartfelt gratitude to all of you here today for sacrificing your lives and time to be public servants, because protecting all that we love here in Hawaii is not easy. It's really, really hard. And so we promise to continue to work together to protect Hawaii from invasive species. And as you've seen by the many needs in our presentations today, we need help. We need help. Please help us. Please help us to do what needs to be done to protect Hawaii, as you've been doing all along. It's so very, very appreciated the time you guys take, especially today, to listen to us. Mahalo.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lori and Christy and the rest of our presenters today, and to all of you senators and representatives, again, just echoing what Lori stated. We just appreciate you all so much taking the time out for this briefing, but your continued support for invasive species work and management that we're all doing. I did have to skip over one presentation about ports of entry biosecurity. There are appropriations bills currently to support that program. And I'm happy to answer any questions after or send more information about that program, but I wanted to leave some time to all of you to ask questions. So with that, I'll pass it back over to Chair Gabbard.
Mahalo, Chelsea. Okay, so Q&A, I'll start it off. Actually, a question for Chelsea. Chelsea, HISC receives $5.75 million every year from the ledge. What is that funding supporting? And is it really meeting your current needs?
Yeah, Christy touched on this, and my graph earlier showed we do get 5.75 million the last 3 or 4 years. And this is a huge contribution to supporting invasive species work that supports research. Some of the research that Mike Melzer from University of Hawaii mentioned with two-line spittlebug, and trying to find new tools and technologies to address invasive species through prevention and management. It supports the Island Invasive Species Committee, the Hawaii Ant Lab, coordinating group on alien pest species, also, communications and outreach. I mean, there's so many projects and programs this funding supports, but of course, we're never able to give the full amount that these programs request. We always are short, and we always have to prioritize and not fund certain projects during those years. So that really kind of cuts into research, especially, and supporting those programs that are developing new tools and technologies that could really help us manage invasive species.
Thank you, Chelsea. Rep Lowen, you have to leave at 2 o'clock, so why don't you go next?
Thank you. I appreciate it. I have a number of questions I'll follow up with offline since I don't have much time, but I guess the primary one is the hoofed. I mean, we have the bill to help control populations of hoofed animals. And I'm just curious, I mean, I know that eradication is a long way out, right? The idea of getting rid of all the hoofed animals, we know that it would be good for forests, but in the meantime, we need them for fire fuel control, and, they're part of the hunting culture locally, et cetera, et cetera. But if there was a long-term goal or recognition in state law that the ultimate goal would be to have these animals out of our ecosystem, so that we could not only protect the forests that still remain, but be able to allow some other areas to have forests bounce back, which is virtually impossible as long as goats and sheep are overrunning them. I mean, how would it change your policies of what you do today? And because, year after year, we pour millions of dollars into fencing projects that primarily are because we have these animals here. And the need for that funding, I mean, it's going to be continuous to repair and maintain. I know the expense for eradication would be large and it would not be without controversy, but on a policy level, what makes the most sense?
Yeah, mahalo, Rep. Lowen, for that question. And I just want to mention that we do have other support here to answer those questions. So we have DLNR Deputy Bob Masuda, the DOFA Administrator David Smith, and also Emma Yun, who you heard from. So I'll pass that over to one of them.
Yeah, good afternoon. This is David Smith. I'm administrator with the Division of Forestry and Wildlife. Thank you, Rep. Lowen, for that question. Yeah, it's kind of complicated. I mean, the animals are widespread. There certainly is the technology to go after them more aggressively, and we have seen, we're seeing, widespread issues right now, specifically with Maui Nui, with excess deer. But you're right, the ongoing cost of managing these animals is huge, not just for native ecosystems, but for agriculture. And we're starting to see health and safety issues with animals, on the highways, whether it be goats in Kona or deer on Maui. And so, there are certainly costs associated with feral animals. That said, there are ways to balance, the protection of the environment with having hunting opportunities. And if you were to move toward more of a situation where you were trying to eradicate the animals for, cost benefit, did a cost benefit analysis and decided that getting rid of animals was the way to go, hunting is still going to be a piece of that for in the long term. And these animals are also in a lot of areas that where hunters can have access that don't have the heavy environmental costs. So lowlands, gulches, areas around residential areas, there's all those sorts of things. There are technologies, including toxicants, that you could use to go after some of these animals, but I think hunting is always going to be an important part of the mix. Fencing is going to always be an important part of the mix. But from the very beginning, forestry in Hawaii was based on protecting our watersheds from feral animals, and there's been concern, since the 30s. One of our first foresters, Judd, was very concerned about the ingress of feral animals into the forest. Built a lot of the trails to get hunters in there to help control animals. So this is not a new situation, and it would be a policy, call whether we were to go after animals. But that's certainly one option is to try to reduce the animals in a more widespread fashion.
I won't go on because I do have to run, but I guess that partly answered my question, but not entirely, because the question is kind of if hypothetically there was a policy that, of course, not in the near term, because it wouldn't be possible. There would continue to be opportunities for hunters for many, many years, and they're partners in doing this work. But if there was a long-term policy, how would it change the approach today, and like what would the cost benefit be over the long term, I guess? But you don't have to answer it right now. I do have to run, so I really appreciate it, and thank you, everybody, for your really informative presentations.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Senator Gabbard's computer shut down, but he's trying to get back on. But Senator Inoue, you can go ahead with your question.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think I need to have Dr. Rogue from HDOA. And the question is incoming nursery plants and trees. And, there's in the industry, there's new varieties, as we all know, when nursery owners travel throughout the country, particularly in the Asian countries, Africa, bringing in new varieties such as the bamboo. And I'm just wondering if we already have a permitting system that we do whenever a farmer or nursery person wants to bring in a new variety of a crop. Then let me say one thing regarding, I guess, not having oversight of too many of the incoming plants. I may be wrong, but this new variety of bamboo seems very popular in landscaping. And let me share with you what the damage is being done throughout Big Island. In particular, and our residents in Pauca, we're only 3 miles out of downtown Hilo, and we had a new person come in and buy the home next to us. And in the landscaping part of his property, he brought in from Puna bamboo. And it's very interesting because our lots are only 12,000 square feet. And so he surrounded the entire property because he wanted privacy and planted the bamboos, and he brought in the fire ants. And so, you know, it's now we're trying to control our own residents, but feel sorry for our neighbors down the street and the entire Pauca Papaico area as well. So I'm just wondering if we do have, if we have a record or know who's ordering plants and trees from other areas, and how, and just tell us what kind of system we have other than your inspection at the piers and the airports.
Well, thank you, Senator, for your question. And I have also my colleague here is the compliance chief, Jonathan Ho, on there to give you the specifics about the bamboo. But in general terms, there's a separation of jurisdiction. Everything that comes in from overseas is under federal jurisdiction. So our regulatory sister agency, USDA, APHIS, PPQ, has the authority. And so our CBP, sorry for all the acronyms, our Custom Border Protection Act specialists are reviewing everything that comes into the state from overseas. We, as the state agency, we have the jurisdiction and the authority over interstate shipment. So I'll let Jonathan talk about specifically the bamboo, because I know when I worked for 17 years in Oregon in the same position, we had actually bamboo on our noxious weed list, some species, because they are invasive, and we have restriction in sale in nurseries. So Jonathan can tell you probably the more detail. Jonathan, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, chairs, members of the committee. Jonathan Ho, Inspection Compliance Section Chief for the Plant Quarantine Branch. So for bamboo specifically, for state regulations, all plants in the family Poaceae, so which would include bamboo, require a 1-year quarantine for importation. And so the importation requires 1-year quarantine. However, interstate movement or transport after it passes quarantine, there is no restriction except for the fact that inter-island movement of the plants would require an inspection. Regarding the actual, I think you had mentioned specifically record keeping of every individual plant and whether it be importation or transportation. We don't keep specific records from that standpoint unless the plant itself is specifically has additional restrictions outside of inspection requirements. The requirements.
So anything on the international side bringing in is, I guess, overseen by the feds.
Yes, we are.
Do they need an application process, or what does the Fed do, and do they then send the information back to our state?
Yeah, so we, for foreign importation, we are actually preempted through the Plant Protection Act. So yeah, we're not getting some of the things. We do work collaboratively with Customs and USDA for certain projects, particularly with fruit and veg. but yeah, a lot of times again, the preemption issue does kind of keep us from getting
Okay.
to things.
Thanks. I don't want to belabor my questions, but I have several, but I think one more important I need to ask, and I think it's with DLNR and with Kim regarding VITA. The question is she still on? Kim?
Yes. Yep.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks for our actually getting involved with what VITA is all about. And I'm glad that the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act, I'm glad you brought that up, because one question that I had, would VITA, okay, so is the act already in place or is being worked on?
I believe it's still being worked on, but we actually have our legal fellow, Andrew Porter, on. So he could probably answer the more technical aspects of that.
Okay, and the reason I'm asking is that, and probably CGAP would probably be interested in this as well, is I thought I remember seeing something on the slide that said something under state control. So, and a reason I'm asking is that if there's going to be any penalties from the illegal discharging, that if we can be in control of any penalties, but I was just wondering that it would be a good time if it's in discussions right now, that there be a penalty as well, and that the penalty for the illegal discharge should come to us, to DLNR, and that would probably help administer some of the funding source, for the agency. So, but can we later on? Why don't we get into a briefing, because I'm really interested, because I'm on the NCSL committees that will probably would try to get some help from our National Association of Legislators and overseeing where we are and what we can also be part of, asking that a penalty be made and funding gets to our programs in Hawaii. So let's get together later and keep me posted. Thank you.
Will do. Thank you.
All right. Any questions from the House chairs?
Yes, Chair, perhaps I can go ahead, if that's all right with you.
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to express my appreciation to all the presenters. This is very important work, very difficult work. And I know there's a lot of asks that are in for funding, and we really need to do what we can to support those asks within our own money committees. There's a lot of competition for the funds as we rework the administration budget. I appreciate your advocacy for those requests. At the same time, I also urge you to, look any opportunities, as you already are, for federal funds. The bipartisan infrastructure law, may be a source of some opportunity. We certainly have emphasized the need to make our ports and highways and transit corridors, more resilient to effects of climate change. And there's ways, I'm sure you're very creative in figuring out how we might be able to provide something that could help us in some of these invasive species issues when it comes to infrastructure projects. So no questions, Chair Gabbard. I just want to express my appreciation. I know our timing, you may want to move along, but I just want to express my appreciation and that we're in this together. We'll see what we can do, come up with state funds, see what we can get federal funds as well. And along with the other chairs here, we do work at the federal level to advocate. And so keep us in the loop, as Chair Inouye said, so that we can help advocate for any things that you're going after in terms of federal support. So thanks very much, and back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, folks, we are out of time. So I would just like to say aloha and mahalo, everyone, for participating in today's info briefing, and to the presenters for sharing all that excellent information. I believe that, it's essential that we we maintain and support these agencies and organizations that are critical to the prevention and management of invasive species. So keep up the great work you're doing. Mahalo and have a wonderful weekend. Aloha and mahalo.
Mahalo.